Hi, my name is Ryan, and I've been a blacksmith for about 20 years now. And I'm here today to share some of my skill and trade with you guys and show you some of the things that might have been made by the local blacksmith. So what exactly is a blacksmith and what do they do? It's a simple enough question. It has a vast network of legitimate answers. My answer is typically something like, Smiths made everything metal. It's oversimplified, but it's honest. Everything and anything made from iron and later steel would have fallen under the care of the blacksmith. From the seemingly mundane, like the nails and hinges and locks that held houses together, to the more complex things like farm equipment and big factory tools. The blacksmith forged these tools and equipment that were used around farms and homesteads, and they also made tools for other tradespeople. Stonemasons and woodworkers rely heavily on tools made from metal, specifically tools made by blacksmiths. And the smiths would have been kept busy repairing and customizing these sort of tools further. So during the 19th century, there were a lot of different blacksmith shops around Whitby, and this is not uncommon. Most people, while I'm demonstrating, will come up and say, oh, my grandfather was a blacksmith. And I think it's neat, but it's not unique. There were so many blacksmiths. We needed to have so many blacksmiths producing so much metalwork that it wouldn't have been uncommon to find one shop with 6 people working in it full time, and they made nothing but nails, or they made nothing but cutlery. So you would have had a lot of very specialized shops around, each doing sort of their own thing, and some of them kind of doing, the everyday repair work as well. Aside from the blacksmith, there were also, of course, coppersmiths, silversmiths, goldsmiths working their own respective metals. So it would have been a lot of work, and you would have required a lot of smiths to make it work, which is why most people can say their grandfather or their father was a blacksmith, or at least was in, one of the branches of the blacksmithing family tree. Blacksmithing is like the trunk of a great big family tree, and it keeps growing branches to this day. The art continues to grow and develop to meet the needs of clientele. As agricultural needs arose, some smiths focused on making big plows and other farm equipment to streamline the process, and this later evolved into making full-on tractors. Some smiths focused on growing our ability to utilize horses. They made shoes, they made harnesses and bits, all kinds of stuff to increase our ability to use the horse to make our lives easier. Some produced firearms, which laid the foundation for much of our modern milling and machining techniques. Large textile and canning machines would have been made by early blacksmiths, and these revolutionized society and industry. A machine that could produce dozens of nails in the time it takes you to forge a small handful creates quite a bit of open freedom for blacksmiths to play with other more important jobs or even just explore and create. So how then does a smith create these wonderful tools? The foundries, forges, and works of smiths across the globe can vary quite a bit depending on where you're looking and when in time. Everybody worked with the resources that they had access to and created their own unique way to go about making metalworks. The underlying principles are pretty much the same though. First, you're going to need a fire, a very hot fire. Traditionally, and nowadays, smiths burn anything from wood, charcoal, coal, peat, basically anything that'll burn hot enough. To make sure that the fire burns hot enough, we introduce air to it. Much like blowing on a campfire, when you use a bellows to pump air into a fire, it increases how hot it burns, getting more than hot enough to heat the metal. But it's dangerous because hot enough and you can destroy your piece. It's all balance. So much like today, blacksmiths would have purchased their bars or their ingots from a local supplier. And this would have been something like a foundry or a large shop that was melting down iron ore or even recycling by melting down old scrap and then creating these bars and selling them to the smith. Smiths didn't have to go out and mine their own iron and refine it all themselves. It's kind of a compartmentalized process where everybody has their own specialty. So the airflow for the forge can come in many interesting designs, again, depending on where and when you look. The type of bellows that most people seem familiar with is this sort of German styles bellows. And it's got this really nice, wooden paddles, and it's got this leather bag here. So these holes allow the air to come in, and then as I blow out, panel in there closes those holes and it breathes out through here. So as I do this, I'm constantly pushing air out into my fire. So this is a pretty typical style bellows that most people seem to recognize. My personal favorite box bellows is a Fugo or Japanese style box bellows, like what you see with my forge. It's a plunger inside that slides back and forth. Whether I'm pushing or pulling, it's constantly blowing a steady stream of air through the forge. So now we have our metal, our fire, and our air. The two basic tools we'll need next is something to strike the material with and something to support the hot material while we strike it. And this is where the hammer and the anvil come in. Again, these tools can look quite different depending on when and where you look. An anvil can be anything as simple as an iron wedge slammed into a stump, or a large, hundreds of pound, massive block of steel with all sorts of different shapes and angles and facets on it, each one for different specialties. Hammers can be about the same. Hammers come in many different shapes and sizes, but most smiths I know, like myself, use one hammer for about 90% of their work, and then have 10 or so hammers for everything else. Now the actual smithing process can begin. The forge heats the metal, the smith uses the hammer and the anvil, and any other tools they've rigged up for the occasion to work the piece. And this process repeats over and over again until the desired shape has been reached. So how would one go about becoming a blacksmith? I think it's much the same today as it would have been in the past. You're either raised into it under a parent or a caregiver, or you find a shop that's willing to teach you and just kind of hang around. Smiths were known for their tricks and secret techniques. There are ancient cultures that even believed that smiths were touched by the gods, and that's what gave them the control of the elements. This sort of mystique and secrecy would have kept the trade mostly in family, but a growing need for metalwork created a growing need for more smiths. The graduated system, or lack thereof, is another one of those things that each culture and smithing branch kind of developed on its own as it needed. Typically what you have is an entry-level smith, like an apprentice, working under a master for a few years. This apprentice works under the smith, develops their technique further, and eventually grows beyond their master's shop, often journeying out to study and practice with other smiths. Hence the term journeyman. This way they find their own individual style and niche, one day setting up their own shop when they're ready and taking on their own apprentices, perpetuating the cycle. Some countries have regulation and accreditation based on these ancient practices still in use today. Canada does not take that approach, likely because the history of smithing here is so vastly different. What it looks like to me is boatloads of journeyman smith were shipped here in about the mid to late 1600s to help with colonization efforts, building the metal parts for settlements, farms, and any other industry. These smiths were sent from all across Europe and beyond, each with their own systems, techniques, tools, and opinions on regulation. And with no established master smiths grandfathered in this area to lay down the law, I think everyone sort of just did what they needed to as they needed to do it. My education was similarly utilitarian. I found a shop that would teach me. I was lucky enough to get a job there. At first, it was grunt work. I did a lot of toilet cleaning and sweeping the floors. But as time went on, more and more tasks were taught. As the business grew, I needed to learn to do specific things to help benefit and perpetuate the company. So I learned techniques in an order that grew the business and made me a more valuable smith. It's a different but equally valid approach when compared to traditional schooling. After years of working under my master smith, I decided to strike out on my own to see what else I could do and learn and experiment with. What sort of stuff could I make for people? What new techniques could I develop? What will my style become? These questions are simple but daunting, like the whole smithing family tree. I find solace knowing that every smith before me asked the same questions, and I'm here because of it. Traditionally, blacksmith shops were known as sort of a gathering hub, and I think it's much like it is today. I've noticed with other shops that I've worked at, and even with my own shop, if the door is open and I'm in there making noise and smoke, there's something about that that just draws people in. And I think traditionally it would have been much the same. If you were walking through town and you heard the blacksmith and you had a couple minutes, you'd just stop in to see what was going on. But also having this kind of open concept workspace allowed people who needed quick fixes, broken tools, mending and repair jobs that needed to be done, to be able to just walk right in off the street and very quickly get something addressed. A lot of blacksmith shops had little waiting areas, something with a fireplace and a couple chairs, where if you were bringing a tool in to be repaired and the blacksmith says, oh, it'll be 15 minutes, you could just watch them work. So I think it's a really nice, kind of wholesome, open, fun environment. And the trade, at least for me, is still very much like that, where I'm always happy to show exactly how something's done and stop and answer questions. And I love walking people through the process. Thanks so much for joining me here at Lynde House today. I hope you learned something about smithing, and I'd love to see you at a future event.